Hi, I'm Marvin Parsons, webmaster for the Sheldon Family Association, or SFA, and keeper of the older and offline database in Roots Magic. In normal genealogy presentations, a single person is studied, but this talk will be about all Sheldons and how the SFA gathered your and your ancestors' facts. My goal is to allow you to find your ancestors through online publications using this evolving system the SFA created. I'd love to have you find your grandparents' written communications to the Sheldon Family Association that are becoming more online at the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana, or ACPL for short. This presentation should get you closer to that goal. Where should you start in finding letters your ancestors wrote? That would be in the Sheldon magazine. In my first SFA meeting back in 2011, I had no idea what the Sheldon magazine or a Sheldon number was. In the Reunion, they split into some progenitor groups, whatever they were. My wife is the Sheldon and went to some group as I sat on the side doing email and playing solitaire on my computer. Then the SFA president pleaded for someone to convert an old SFA database called Sheldon Family Genealogy System into a real genealogy program so they could do a Sheldon book and distribute it to libraries. I became interested. I'd always wanted to learn Microsoft Access, and this was a real problem to work on. I said I'd look at the data, but no guarantees, and you won't believe what I discovered. This story starts in about 1830 with that Sheldon Methodist minister Henry Alcott Sheldon traveling 2,000 to 3,000 miles a year through Michigan and Ohio. He collected handwritten names of Sheldons and their descendants and published a book of 11,000 of them back in 1855 to 1857. If you go to our Sheldon Family Org website and click on More Sheldons and then on the Sheldon magazine, the first link will take you to a Google site showing a reprint of all 4 volumes. Here are those steps one more time. I'll do an online demonstration in a separate YouTube video posted on my channel as there's so many tools to help you find your ancestors in this slideshow. The Sheldon numbers were down the middle left column in yellow here. If a family was created with a marriage or children, then the number went to the left and was repeated. See John, number 13, married a Sarah on the left side, so his number is repeated on the left and her name below his. They have a child named John, number 23, Sheldon number, to the right. Given a number to each person was great for genealogy, and having marriages numbers was great also. Not using last names and full dates was not so great. The priority seemed to save ink, as you needed to read up to see a full number, like a birth date of 65 was really 1665, taken from the 1663 above it. That's on the right. Lots of data was missing, and this was a printer's proof version. I'll give more detail after in my extra videos. Each page had 50 numbers on it. Facing pages had the same number. One was a left and the other was the right. Page 2 had a 2 left and a 2 right. The left page had numbers 1 through 50, and the right had 51 through 100. Then facing pages had a total of 100 names. This made it easy to find Sheldon numbers or people in the book. An example is a Sheldon number of 425 would be on page 5, 25 down the left page. A number of something like 1260 would be found on the page 13 and down 10 on the right side. The rule was easy. Add 1 to the hundreds digit of the Sheldon number for what page it was on, and then 1 to 50 on the left side or 51 to 100 on the right. Easy, right? Now, if you're like me, your head starts to swim about now, and you hope someone else figures this stuff out. But where are your ancestors? Isaac, John, and William are at the top of the first page, so they were first progenitors, right? Well, we all came from them, right? I'll show you after the slideshow, in a separate slideshow. The Sheldon magazine was really 700 single pages in 4 or 5 different handwritten volumes on 9 by 14 rag ledger paper. H.O. sent these off to a printer to publish and then waited to see a copy for review and make corrections. Volume 1 was printed in 1855. The others were printed in 1857 in January, April, and October. The Sheldon magazine was multiple magazines published a few years apart. That really confused me. We'll come back to the magazine in a while and get a look at the missing Volume 5. In the 50-year history of the SFA, available on the website and publications, you can read the family met unofficially many times before 1939. The purpose in 1939 was to stimulate interest in the Sheldon family and museum with dues of only $2 a year. A few Sheldon families gatherings were yearly and occasionally before this time. This means you are part of a 140-year tradition. Congratulations and thank you for being an SFA member. We are keeping our yearly reunion traditional by doing this online reunion this year. Jumping forward to 1955, the reunion turned its focus to genealogy and to this 100-year anniversary to H.O.'s magazines. The goal was to finish and correct H.O.'s work, publish it, and give it to libraries. Leland Sheldon became an SFA officer and created an index cards into the printer's copy of H.O.'s work. He had sent out letters to everyone named Sheldon a few years before the 1955 meeting and started the Sheldon folder collection. He had created about 5,000 3x5 index cards tracing Sheldon numbers and last names, making them easier to find. Index cards were easier than using the magazine, and he could also point to the letters in the folders. See an earlier card for --9332 above. Alan Jane Elizabeth, who married Joel Henry Wells, but above traced back to their marriage, traced back to 4611, who was Lucinda, and all the way back to 005 Isaac. This reference is in the Sheldon magazine. Would you like to read a letter collected in 1950 from your parents to the SFA? Pay attention, we're going to get there. As Leland built his index cards from the magazine, he wrote hundreds of letters to any Sheldon. See a letter standard letter attached that Leland wrote in 1960. Will you become interested with me for a while was a great introduction. On the back or other page was a family group sheet to fill out and send back. They kept all of these letters for us to read. Can you find the folder with all her other letters? From Leland's letter writing, he found a Carew Sheldon, a real genealogist, who had already spent about 20 years working on the Sheldon genealogy. Leland also found an original copy of the Sheldon magazine that Carew did not have, belonging to a John Layton Sheldon in Medina, New York. Now he didn't need the printer's copy and could use the original information. Leland and Carew teamed up, loaning the original magazine to Carew while Leland wrote and collected more letters, getting ready to print a corrected magazine. Carew's older copy of the magazine had 18 pages missing, which was discovered in this newer copy. Carew spent about 2 months combing through the original printing, finding over 1,500 errors, which postponed the printing of a newer Sheldon magazine. They wanted to get it right this time. Sadly, in the history, H.O. Sheldon also had about 3,000 letters that were lost after he completed his 5 handwritten revisions of the magazine. In the next 2 years, 2 different indexes into the original magazine were created and printed. First was a men married into the Sheldon family, and next was mothers married to Sheldons. Remember, the original magazine only put the last name once. Was that to save ink? Now that Carew had his printer's copy and the original, he found over 1,500 errors in the magazine. Crazy. There was some legal battle between Carew and Leland in about 1957, which also I need to research more. I assume it was the ownership or publishing rights of the magazine. Can you find your ancestors yet in the reprints now with an index into it? Perhaps. In 1958, with letters coming from anyone named Sheldon, they couldn't find a connection for many of the families. They wanted a progenitor for each non-connected tree. What if they found Sheldons that were independent of H.O.'s work? How could they give a number to someone not in the magazine? Maybe Gottfried was a family head, maybe not. How could they add numbers before 1700? The search for the ancestors before 1700 now required more research. In 1961, Emily Horton Sheldon published Sheldons prior to 1700, raising questions about the real progenitors of the Sheldon family. At least one of her conclusions was rejected by the SFA. She claimed that Godfrey line was the only line that could be positively traced back to England. This is a great detailed read and online for people searching back to England. I'll show you where that is in a YouTube. The bylaws changed a bit after that, and only people who could trace their family in America prior to 1600 were added to the index cards and given a Sheldon number. This new numbering system that extended the original 100-year-old Sheldon number had a rough start. It was supposed to be birth order after the original Sheldon number, but what about the 10th and 11th child? Or how about adoptions? Should they use dashes between generations? What was the real number? Lots of different standards were used. In 1965, the SFA did a reprint of Volume 2. No email at that time. This was so they had 200 members and they got a copy of this puzzle, a reprint. Of course, they needed Volume 1 to trace backwards, right? The letter collection was growing with each letter or returned to family group sheets meticulously studied and marked with Sheldon numbers and added to the folders. A new unconnected line was discovered of Richard as more index cards and letters were added. By 1969, extra volumes of the magazine were going to be produced, with extension numbers for newer members added. They delayed this printing also, trying to get it right this time. They also had about 50,000 names on index cards and still working to make them connect. In an SFA quarterly, someone wrote in a 1969 article, "There are so many letters and index cards, we've counted 210 Mary Sheldons in the collection born before 1850. Volume 6 was being constructed from margin notes from the original manuscript and new information discoveries. Also in 1969, the LDS Library offered to take the collection of Sheldon magazines, but the SFA rejected the offer. Volume 4 reprint came out in 1972, but you really needed the previous volumes to find parents' names. This was why all those indexes were created. In the preface, it said they included those missing 18 pages that Carew didn't originally have. I wonder which volume your ancestors are in and what numbering system they used to file their index cards, and which letters. You just want to find your grandfather's letters in those folders, right? Now, we've talked about making index cards from letters coming from any Sheldon, but here's an example. His cover letter also had blank cards or family group sheets to fill out and return. There wasn't enough room on a 3x5 card, so they decided to start using 4x6 cards and redo lots of this handwritten cards. They decided to redo all the index card to 4x6 and include more information to better track the connections. They also put Sheldon numbers on all the letters if they could connect. Many were handwritten like the one above. I wonder if they had to use a magnifying glass to read this kind of card. It It was no easy task to build back and correct. Let's talk about the combined effort using SFA quarterly articles. You can read these on the website, the quarterlies. Starting in 1977, the Family Association Quarterly had a section called In Search of Sheldon Kins, or ISOSK, which lasted until about 2014. In these ISOSK articles went for 37 years asking any Sheldon to submit information. They wanted to collect any Sheldon's information. In 1983, a newer section called God Knows Who, or GKW, was an article put in publications which lasted until 1997 for We Can't Find How These Guys Connect. Another quarterly article called Locator started in about 1992 and went through 2014, or 22 years, of Sheldon's names that were found in sources like vital records or military lists, which were in libraries, and people would find this information and send it in to be published in the quarterly. Imagine all the letters that were collected and articles written from those letters. Did your ancestors contribute to any of this information? Can we find those letters? On each letter collected, the Sheldon number with extension was written and filed, waiting for more communication. No email back in those days. An index card was created for members not yet known. The collection grew and grew and grew with estimated 70,000 Sheldons by early 1980. See a letter here which was typed and then added to carefully in script, making handwritten notes. And there's many letters that are typed, but all kinds that are handwritten. This card verified that Godfrey married Alice Frost, which was saved in the collected folder by a Sheldon number. By 1984, the Sheldon magazine had been microfilmed for preservation and given to Bowling Green State University for safekeeping. E. Mark Sheldon was the president of the SFA at that time and retired from Xerox with a home computer. There were about 5,000 members at that time, and he decided to put the membership and mailing list on his home computer. Index cards of the specific families were sent to the members, copied by the members, and sent and hopefully returned to the SFA for filing. He now had a mailing list for all of those 500 members. There were so many cards, they decided to break them up by progenitor. But who were the progenitors at that time, and how do you map the Sheldon numbers and these extensions to the 5 first Sheldons in America prior to 1770? In 1984, Keith M. Sheldon published a 920-page book called John Sheldon of Providence, showing 13 generations of his John line. Now you can find this book online and study it if you're a John descendant. I guess the confusion of multiple progenitors was why he did a single line. His book, instead of using Sheldon numbers, uses generation counters like first generation, second generation, but also he included the Sheldon numbers for ones that he knew. Was this the beginning of a Sheldon book for all Sheldons? In 1984, more 3x5 cards were redone or improved with the bigger 4x6 index card. The SFA put a single person in charge of each progenitor line. A newer numbering system was created so the computer could standardize people. The progenitor letter, followed by the birth order, was the new standard for breaking up the cards. Did anybody think these lines might cross? Who got the card for a line that crossed? Can those index cards help you find your ancestors' letters? I'll show you all those index cards after the slideshow. In 1955, Sheldon numbers needed an extension for newer families that weren't in the original magazine. Now, in 1985, they needed this other system with this X extension numbering system. The progenitor line, followed by a birth order, was created in this time frame. But what happens to the 10th child? A single letter A meant 10, a letter B meant 11, and then you could use the letters of the alphabet as a single character. But what about adopted children? They were given a W, X, Y, and Z, hoping that someone didn't have that many children. Might the index card changing number standards from the SFA website to the resources? You can see these index cards from our Sheldon website. The progress of entering index cards into the computer took thousands of hours, many years, and multiple people. There is an article in the 1987 on page 134 Computer Corner article that explains in great detail how the new numbering system must be entered for the computer to deal with these corrected numbers from 5 different people entering information from the 5 different progenitors, if you care to read that. The numbering system changed. In 1985, E. Mark Sheldon started entering index cards into his homemade Sheldon family genealogy system called SFGS. He estimated there to be 30,000 index cards to enter. 2 years later, he reported that 17,632 were in the database with only 12,000 to go. That took him 2 years. He taught others how to add cards to the data and then merge them into a master copy. They mailed these hard drives back and forth to complete the work. They didn't live close to each other. They all got computers. There were 5 people doing this index card stuff into computer program, and then each having a single progenitor line. Back at that time, E. Mark Sheldon announced the Sheldon number is dead, and progenitor letter and birth order will be the new standard. The Sheldon number will be kept for archive reasons in the database only. Well, what about all those old letters and already filed index cards? How can we find those ancestors' letters now? For a little side story on the Sheldon coat of arms was voted on. You can read that article in the quarterlies to find out how many candidates there were. I always thought the coat of arms was a flag carried back in the Knights of the Round Table days, but to see that it was voted on in 1990 surprised me. Anyhow, the database continued to grow. Index cards are shared with members and mailed back. Some of the SFAQ articles in these days plead with members to mail back their copied index cards so they can correctly be filed again. Were a bunch of index cards lost? I hope not. With all the letter writing and collections, new Sheldon discoveries were being found. Even a connection between a Sheldon and the Mayflower is discovered at that time. But it also meant more people to add in the old SFGS database. A book for each progenitor is suggested in the 1991 Reunion. 60,000 Sheldons were now in the card file and being added to the computer database. In 1994, the SFA still wanted to publish a family book and put it in libraries for all to read. They now had a growing database and started looking for a good book format for the information. Now, with 10 years of computer data entry, the database had gone through DBase 4 and DOS, and then to Foxbase and now in Windows. Rose Sheldon Newton continued using Microsoft Access and entering Sheldon numbers from here. A book for each progenitor line is suggested as a task for the SFA. It was in 1999 the first article about DNA appeared in the quarterlies. The database was growing and finding connections was difficult, but maybe the DNA could help. This was also the year the database went to a Brett Sheldon who converted it to Microsoft Access. Perhaps a conversion to a good Windows program could produce a good book. Did I miss the fact that Brett Sheldon took a few years to convert the database into Access? Even though the data was now converted to Access, with 60,000 descendants, a book format wasn't part of his conversion. More people are added to the database and it continues to grow with each letter and new index card. If a link to a progenitor is confirmed, Rose creates and gives the person Sheldon number and files this card and keeps the letters. She must also calculate which progenitor it comes from. Very privately, this is like new information, very privately, in 2009, the Sheldon Family Association asked Allen County Public Library to put the Access database online, which they did in a public site that only the board of directors knew to find. For the next 2 years, data was collected and entered into Rose's computer as the book format was being researched. It also started a search for putting the Access data into a real genealogy program. Now they had 70,000 Sheldon descendants and over 400 active members. About half the members use computer genealogy programs. They sent the Access database to master genealogist and looked at it in Access and returned it non-converted. Rose retires and sends the files to Jack Sheldon, who returns them within a year, noting that they are confusing. Now let's focus on the Sheldon family database and where Marv Parsons enters the picture in 2011 in the SFA reunion in Portland, Oregon. He gets a CD that has this SFGS in Microsoft Access format. He is confused by the Sheldon numbering system, but understands the extensions. The progenitor number system seems okay, but it changed with each new or different discovery. He picks Roots Magic for the program to convert the data into. It takes him 2 years, keeping the Sheldon number, computer number, and all the notes from the previous database entry. There's a long story on my YouTube channel if you're interested on how the old SFGS got into Access and then into Roots Magic. In 2014, the conversion is finally accomplished, but now in Roots Magic, there are 85 pages of problems. Things like lived to 200 years old or died before born are easy to find in Roots Magic, but need cleaning up. There is also a push to have Rose Newton move all the SFA collections of index cards and folders from her garage to Allen County Public Library for archiving and to put online for all of us to see. Sue Sheldon takes over the cleanup committee and works on finding and fixing impossible dates in Roots Magic. Allen County will archive our index cards and folders, but they need to get 9 file cabinets from Rose's house to the library. Allen County is going to scan everything and put it online for us to see. So in 2016, Allen County finally gives Sheldon family a sample of folder scans, about 4,000 pictures, asking for help labeling the pictures so researchers like you and me can find our ancestors. I guess the mix of Sheldon numbers, index cards, folder labels isn't a good library numbering system. So this guy Marv gives Allen County Public Library an Excel spreadsheet with a newer numbering system on it that connects all of these names. So you can watch a video about my connection on YouTube. Each person needs this new number. Is there a new numbering system again? In 2016, much more work is done to clean up the Roots Magic database. Sheldon family bylaws are changed to get more members involved. Roots Magic database still has duplicate people and cleanup problems as GEDCOM files are added to it. Now the users that added the GEDCOM files, they don't have any idea about any of the numbering systems. Allen County in 2017 is still receiving SFA documents from Rose's estate. They are cleaning and preserving them and trying to decide how to make them public so you and I can find our ancestors. Which numbering systems should they use? How are we supposed to find our ancestors' letters with all those different systems? In 2018, Allen County finally puts online scans of all index cards, some 19,000 of them. They also have about 20% of the folders online ready for us to view. They have 351 folder collections of letters. These folders are collections of letters from 1955 to 2014. Ancestry also becomes a newer method to see your ancestors, built from the 2016 Roots Magic file. By reading old letters and index cards, Roots Magic can find more information and correct typos. These might also be used to help clean up the last impossible date problems. They might also uncover brick wall information that wasn't entered into the old index cards and database. These are letters we want to find and read. To help find these cards and letters, links into Allen County Public Library from our SFA website are added. About 1,000 to 2,000 connections are added to the Roots Magic database as web tags. Which number system, if any, will help you find your ancestors? Where are your ancestors' letters in the Allen County Public Library folders? What numbers are they connected to? Since 2018, I've added links to all the Allen County Sheldon Family Association index cards and most of the folders using my Roots Magic web tag feature. I've discovered about a quarter of the folders have living date of birth information in them from the family group sheet submitted by your parents or grandparents. I've also discovered hundreds of facts that were missing, adding information into the database from the folders. Allen County reports there are about 10 cubic feet of folders in the collection, but they've only scanned 2 feet worth. Imagine a 10-foot tall stack of paper waiting to be read, indexed into a real genealogy program where researchers like you and me could find their roots. I've also added about 1,000 Vermont Vital Record links into my Roots Magic file. My effort for the last year has been to get Allen County to finish scanning and put online the last 8 feet of Sheldon Family folder collection. I've been updating and correcting my Roots Magic database for the last 65 years worth of collected communication. I've also used my online sources like Genealogy Gophers, Ancestry, MyHeritage, Family Search, and even Google to add or correct our genealogy in my linked tree. Is this enough for you to find your family letters yet? As you can see, our SFA group has its roots from early colonial America and been meeting annually since about 1939. We have tools to sort and filter and view data now online. I'd love to see you find stories and correspondences from the 65 years when your parents and grandparents found and joined the SFA. You were part of this 100-year tradition by being in this reunion. The computer age now lets us see documents and communications our parents sent into the SFA and we collected for us to find and read. I hope you can now appreciate all the years of work in building our and your family ancestors. Have I given you enough history of the database for you to now look for and find your ancestors? You need to realize the numbering system changed 5 times. Allen County Public Library is still trying to make it user-friendly enough for us to do research. I'll add videos on the end of this YouTube channel showing the Allen County Public Library scans, addressing each magazine or online data discussed in this slideshow. Add comments below this presentation for a specific request if you have one. And good hunting for your ancestors' information. I hope you too will be very surprised with what you discover.